duplicitous?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. Duplicitous means dishonest, like portraying one thing but actually meaning something else. Yeah. In a way, yes. But you could say almost any a political enemy of almost any politician could call, their enemy of duplicitous. So you have to, that's where you have to kind of measure and see what amount of duplicitousness. Okay, I'm gonna show. We got to this. What happened to the defenders of the Alamo? Got executed, and they got executed. And who's commander of the Mexicans? Who was the dictator? What did he ban that would trigger the War of Texas Independence? And who was that? The citizen of the U.S. who came into Texas?
Houston, Davy Crockett.
Let me finish. We got Davy Crockett in Houston, who set up in the 1820s, will preserve here for settlers to come in if they swore loyalty to Mexico and became Catholic.
Austin.
Yeah, that's Austin. Crockett. Sam Houston. I think we're set. We got the Goliad. What happened to Goliad? Yeah. Surrendered, executed. It is a cool flag. I'm just going to go once again. That's a cool flag. But it doesn't seem like he just went, like in a cut his arm off. Don't do that. Yeah, but a disembodied arm? Of course, that'd be kind of cool. Disembodied arms. Okay, moving on. So with that, now it gave the Texans a rally. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. And so you have this weird thing where the Alamo, which was a humiliating defeat by any measure, is going to become a memorial for Texas independence. Actually, not at first. Today, a lot of people go, including this guy. I just thought that was funny. But they nearly tore down the Alamo so many times. Most of the mission was torn down. The only thing that remains is the church. And that was nearly torn down many times. But I like this picture. It's at the turn of the last century. And there wasn't any really memorial there, but it was a cafeteria. I find that really amusing. But John Wayne would also make one of his, I think this was the first movie John Wayne directed and wrote, or helped write. It was called The Alamo. And it was about the Alamo and where he could be a hero. There he is, John Wayne, playing Davy Crockett. See the coonskin hat. And they actually made a set for the Alamo and a couple little bits be like Old Town San Antonio, then the Alamo. And hear something over here? Huh? It's the virus. Oh well. I think you roll the die. You roll the die. So as many people go to that movie set as go to the actual Alamo in San Antonio, which I find amusing. Has anyone seen this movie? You have?
Yeah, when I was like very young, my dad every weekend would watch John Wayne movies.
He punished you because you were bad.
Basically, and then we went to the Lord of the Rings, and that was where the nightmares came.
Wow. Okay. They also worked to the whole goal was to make people run away. This is going to be called Runaway Scrape. And what happened? Scrape. I'm sorry. And all these Runaway Scrape. And all these Texans, remember those immigrants, a lot of them were, what do you call somebody who just sits on a piece of land and says, it's mine. They start running away and towards the Sabine River, which that's the border of Texas and Louisiana. So it seemed to work. But then Santa Anna made a horrible mistake. He thought it was over. And so he divided his two armies up into a group of columns, basically to kind of have a net to scoop up the remaining Texan forces, because he thought it was over. So by dividing his army up into smaller units, sure, you might be able to take over more territory, cover more territory, but now your individual units are vulnerable. And Sam Houston, who was fleeing, his scouts saw the couple thousand men that were with Santa Anna in camp in a bad spot. Actually, they just take a break in a bad spot along San Jacinto Creek. And so on April 21st, 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto. That's the picture that's on the battlefield itself. And it was a really bad place, or a good place, really depending on your point of view. Santa Anna, thinking there'll be nothing more than a little raid, thought this would be perfect. There's a river behind them, and on two sides, there's mesquite trees. And so he had his men go in there and basically take just a break during the march. Like the cavalry took off their saddles and used them as pillows and took a nap, that kind of thing. And has anyone ever seen mesquite trees? They're like big bushes, and they have thorns that are that long sticking out of them. So they're really hard to run through. Horses won't go through them. And so they also bottled themselves up. Sam Houston, seeing this and happened to have his forces concentrated, literally rolled the die and attacked, and worked better than anyone could have thought. He took the Texans or the Mexicans by surprise. They put up a little bit of fight. Some of the cavalry, they shot their horses and used them as breastworks, but it was over in about 5 minutes. But the killing lasted for an hour, as the Mexicans who fled were run down by the Texans and bayoneted or stabbed or killed. Revenge for the Alamo. At the end of the battle, you don't need the numbers. I just want to give you an idea how decisive of a victory this was for the Texans. Just a fluky thing that hit perfectly. They couldn't run away. They were swept, taken by surprise. This is the map that shows, but really the map never really happened. In fact, they had a couple cannon. The cannon didn't even open fire. It was over so fast. I mean, cannoneers are like, oh, we got the cannon. We want to fire. So Santa Anna, realizing very quickly that this is a disaster, he and his staff fled to a nearby little hill. It was kind of a little mound, kind of clayish gumbo soil. So it's really thick, heavy soil on this hill. And I'm going to have to show you this. I'm going to have to take you to the Battle of San Jacinto. I know, I'm pulling out my artistic skills. I'm bragging. I know, what can I say? And so, clay, as we all know, is orange, right? Yeah, that's science. I mean, who's been to Texas? Everything's orange, right? Yeah. So, that's the hill he's on. Santa Anna's on there. Now, they wore nice blue uniforms, so they're on top. So here's Santa Anna. Which one's Santa Anna? No, he's the guy with the big hat. Jim. So there's Santa Anna. So we have this cannon sitting down, the two cannon. One of them's like, hey, look, there's guys on a hill. Let's fire at them. Now, Santa Anna's basically looking at this going, okay, I'm going to flee, sneak through the trees. He still has 8,000 men. He hasn't lost. He can rally them. This is just one battle, even though it might be over. But he can still fight again. So his plan is to leave, and he's floating on air. He's still so giddy that he can do this. But on the bottom is a cannon. So here's the cannon. Here's a couple Texans firing the cannon. Texans. Big hats because they're Texans. Okay, so it's a gun. A howitzer kind of lobs its shells, but this is a gun. It's supposed to be for direct fire, so the barrel doesn't go up very high. So the cannonballs were hitting here. It's cannonball. It was a 6-pound iron ball. Kind of, that's what they were called 6-pounders. They fired this iron ball, not explosive, just an iron ball. That's all they have. So it's hitting air and then bouncing up the hill. So you can imagine Santa Anna and his staff were sitting there watching this. Bang, cannonball, bang, cannonball, marching. And they're watching, a little bit distracted, and all of a sudden, bang, one lands right in front, takes a couple bounces right at Santa Anna. Now, Santa Anna should have done, I think, the logical thing. What's that?
Yeah, right.
Right? But what did Santa Anna do? Decided to stop it. He puts his leg out to stop the cannonball. The cannonball hits the leg. He goes, his leg is ripped nearly off. I mean, like broken right there, but he hung on by just a couple tendons and skin. Just hanging there. And he, on his side. That was shocking. It was like, ah, they ran, they grabbed him, and they kind of wrapped it as tight as they could. I mean, he's gonna lose the leg. And they basically figure, okay, we're not done yet, but we got to get him to quit screaming because he's an agony. Well, they have a lot of opium. And so he starts smoking opium as a painkiller, and they rig up a stretcher and they start trying to sneak him out through the mesquite trees. They're going to keep fighting. Well, the Mexican soldiers who had surrendered and weren't killed by the Texans, they thought Santa Anna was dead. And so they're kind of miserable in a big group after they all surrendered. And one of the Mexican soldiers saw them carrying Santa Anna off. He goes, "There's Santa Anna! He's alive!" And they all start cheering. So the Texans go, "Oh, there it is," and capture him. And so they captured Santa Anna. Now, Houston was wounded too. But here's Santa Anna in agony on opium. And he signed away Texas independence. And that's how Texas became independent. That and, well, we got to get, there's a leg issue too, but yes, as luck would have it, Santa Ana is eventually going to have over 1,000 artificial legs. We're not done with Santa Ana. Tomorrow, part B of the Santa Ana / leg story. And have we got the chewing gum? Yes.
So you're saying that Santa Ana, some kind of way Texas, but it's like blown up, screaming in agony and probably high at the height.
My guess is he probably isn't that high, but he's also just miserable. But yes, yeah, I bet the pain is still there. I haven't lost my leg recently, but I'm guessing.
Recently?
So he's independent. Now, Mexico has never confirmed this. And for the next decade, Mexico says, we're going to get Texas back. Texas is not independent. So they said this is illegitimate. That's what Santa Ana will claim. We're not done with Santa Ana. But now Texas, who declared independence during runaway scrape a couple weeks earlier, is now independent. And taking, the stars of the American flag, they call themselves the Lone Star Republic. The original flag was that blue field, which, by the way, the Confederacy would use this very same flag called the Bonnie Blue flag when the Civil War began, but they would later adopt a flag very similar to this one. Very similar. And that became the Lone Star Republic. And that is why today they're the Lone Star State. And that's why the star is such a, kind of a single star is such an important feature of Texas. But another thing, they just assumed they'd be annexed. They just assumed the United States would annex them. But there's a couple big things. First off, they had slave codes. Remember, the whole thing was about slavery. There are a few restrictions on the importation of the slave trade, but they had slave codes. So this is going to be a slave state. But look at this map. Palos is this, the light yellow. Texas claimed, the new republic, all land north of the Rio Grande, and that goes all the way up into Colorado. And therefore, all the way up into Wyoming. That could be 7 slave states. And almost immediately, when the Jackson administration decided, or kind of floated, should we annex them? And they weren't really sure how you annex a country. This was still up in the air. The issue of slavery, actually, what I should have wrote down slave codes. Annexation and the issue of, slave power. The issue of slave power. Because remember, the northern states, many of them, Democrats and Whigs, were fearful of the expansion of slave power. And northern Democrats did not want as many as 7 slave states. Northern Whigs either. This is very divisive. So what did Jackson do? He didn't want this to be an issue in the election. So Texas is going to wither on the vine for the next decade. A technically independent country, but pretty shaky. Mexico wants them back. Who knows? They might invade. Do you really want to go to Texas and roll the die and then be taken back by Mexico? They're really kind of withering there. And so with that, now, jump right to here. I think we know what this means. Any chance to show this, I take. Conflict is coming. But here's a reenactment of Santa Ana. The best part is the cannon's name is Richard. Santa Ana. Yes, that is pretty impressive film. Well, you can't have everything. I mean, it's the 30s. Oh, and the next one's a guy getting a brick broken over his head. And yes, I know what you're. Now, we already wrote this down. But Old Kinderhook in 1836. So this is something we already know. 1836, Van Buren would be elected president. The Whigs were split. So I just re-showed that slide because we already mentioned this. So that was that election year. Texas. Van Buren totally ignored the issue of Texas, and so did the Whigs. Texas never heard of it. Moving on. But now let's get to the Van Buren administration. Van Buren's depression, he's blamed for it. Here, so his entire administration will be tainted by this. So in 1840, when he runs for re-election, everyone's going to be blaming him for this panic, this long-term unemployment that has never happened before, blame him. He would get an independent treasury, and that would be a way to distribute money outside the banking system to replace the bank. It's actually not a bad idea. They just never implemented it fully, so it never really worked. But it would be an independent treasury until 1913. But Texas was also behind the scenes. Any position he took on Texas would be very divisive. Now, you don't need to know him, but Richard Mentor Johnson was his vice president. And this was one of the first attempts at a campaign slogan for him, as when he at first wanted to run for president. He claimed credit at the Battle of Thames for killing Tecumseh. Now, almost certainly not, and we don't know exactly what happened to Tecumseh, but let me read to you this nice little poem. Rumsey Dumpsey, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh. Okay, they got to work on the rhyming thing, don't you think? Yeah. With Van Buren? Yeah. He couldn't decide. His position on annexation of Texas would offend North or South, so he couldn't make a decision. And we're talking, this is splitting the party. This is kind of what Calhoun said was going to happen, why he wanted the tariff. By the way, there's Martin Van Buren, that's him in 1846. And his position on slavery is very complex. So at that, in 1840, Van Buren will be the Democratic nominee for president. The Democratic nominee. Now, the Democrats actually would have preferred somebody else, like Richard Mentor Johnson, who was a kind of a scoundrel. But they're kind of stuck with him. And so here's a picture trying to show the drunkenness, lined up for it's also very anti-Semitic about going up at a lawyer. Here's a run on a bank, all under glory. We're not going to show this little hat like that. That was Andrew Jackson. And once again, it's Texas. He couldn't make a decision. Texas would anger Southerners if he didn't annex, anger Northerners if he tried to annex. He was caught in Texas. Everything was about Texas. That became the symbol of expansion of slavery. What kind of system are we going to allow for the rest of the United States? This system, which more and more they're saying free labor capitalism, of slavery. That will be the trigger of war. It's all about slavery, but it's expansion of slavery in the territories. So at that, the Whigs are now set. They tried to divide the Electoral College with 3 and 36. Now they think Van Buren's vulnerable, but they have a problem. They represent those who oppose to democracy, the elite, either the urban capitalist elite or the big plantation owners. And what they needed to do is try to appeal to the common men who live in log cabins, the kind of people that Jackson appealed to. That idea of this American dream where someday you can have your own little farm. Even those industrial workers in Massachusetts wanted that someday. And so they're in the minority. How does the minority win? They represent the minority interest. They got to split the Democrats. Nativism was one way. Wage workers in the Northeast, they could say, the Democrats are allowing those Catholic immigrants to come in and take your jobs, take your homes, take your culture. Remember, we've already talked about immigrants from Ireland, immigrants from Southern Germany, but more. How do we appeal to them? And so what they did is this. If you can't beat them, fool them. Sell an image of a common man. Today, this is known as the culture wars. Act like your version of what people want to see. You know, people want to see whatever the common man might be. Like in Montana, you know, it's always, everybody tries to run out there and act like they're this image of a Montana, which as far as I know, appears to be gutting fish. But you're a fisherman or a hunter or something like that. You're just like everybody else, no matter how rich you might be. They try to do that image. I remember in the election of 2000, a lot of people said they supported George W. Bush because he's somebody you can go out and have a beer with, which is kind of amazing to me because this very wealthy patrician is going to do that. But it was that image of like an everyman, and Davy Crockett fit that bill. Crockett was the first attempt the Whigs had to try to sell image. To sell image. So Davy Crockett was this frontiersman, but they portrayed him as a Jackson. Here he is on the frontier, he's from Tennessee. They painted this whole image of him as this mountain man, but he's promoting the interests of the elite. But he's like this American dream. And soon, you know, this was quite successful as myth making, especially after what happened at the Alamo. Here's a comic book from the 1960s. You can even buy a Lego Davy Crockett, or another version of the Davy Crockett. And, okay, that's the most dangerous weapon I think I've ever heard of. The Army wanted their own atomic bombs in the late 1950s. So they turned this, what's called a recoilless rifle, but it's an anti-tank weapon, into it could fire an 8-kiloton atomic bomb. It was really a dirty one, lots of radioactivity. So it would kill the crew. But they deployed 300 of these in West Germany during the Cold War. All I got to say is this. I'm just shocked sometimes that we're here. Yes.
I'm 1,000 and
Probably you'd be. But with that, no, you'd be wrong. I also have this. My Davy Crockett finger puppet. You do? You want to do that joke with him? How are you doing? Did you see my lips move? A master. Here's the other thing too, as we know, all wigs have magnetic heads. No, this is a true weapon. Yeah, they called it Davy Crockett. And I thought it was really funny that somebody made a Lego out of that. Meaning somebody had, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of time. So, the 1950s, Davy Crockett, the most popular of the new, one of the most popular television show of that decade is going to be Davy Crockett on this new media called television, this new television network called ABC, who they rolled the die on this thing called, it's going to be called The Wonderful World of Disney. And it's going to be run out of Disneyland. And ABC showed it. And they showed Davy Crockett was his first one. And the theme song for that became the #1 song of 1957, one of the most popular songs of the decade. Do you want to hear it? Did it work? No, Davy Crockett was kind of a dolt. And that's why he had to flee to Texas to try to reestablish his reputation. He would have been known as nothing more than this kind of this idiot who they sent to Congress who didn't know what he was doing, but then the Alamo happened. But William Henry Harrison would be the nominee. He could be their Jackson. He's the war hero. Tippecanoe, the Battle of the Thames. They could get a Jackson. They could get the hero. He had that reputation. Now, they hid the fact that he was born to incredibly wealthy parents and lived in a massive mansion in Indiana. He was one of the richest men in the United States. No, he's the war hero, the general, just like Jackson. He's just like you. And they portrayed this image. Now, candidates didn't campaign for themselves. So it's friendly newspaper editors, letters to the editor, but they also kind of the first modern campaign. So they thought they could convince he's a Western, they could get some of the Western Democrats. And also they could figure out a way to get some Southerners in there, hit that image, he's like us. And they avoided the major issues. What was their position on Texas? I never heard of Texas. All I know is the Battle of Tippecanoe. And so with that, but he did support Clay's American system. Tariffs, bank, internal improvements. And I never made a big deal about it. But now he's going to have, I'll show this in just one sec. Oh, so here is Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, the two leading Whigs, and they're using Harrison like a puppet, like they control him, they own him, and that was his thing. He's kind of a dolt. He doesn't know much. He's going to be a puppet of Henry Clay. So they just said, no, he's a commoner. He's just like us. He's in a log cabin. He's like everybody else. And so this was the idea. Policies for this elite, the capitalists, the financiers, the bankers, the moneyed elite, but act like a common man. Image. Portray something else. So remember I told you about George W. Bush? So they portray that and said, he's a farmer, he has a ranch in Texas. No, he didn't. They actually bought a ranch during the campaign. So we got pictures of him chopping wood or got the chains out there. Did it work? Yeah, worked. He has a ranch. He's like us. Hey, most people don't have a ranch, but that was kind of like, oh, but he must be. And so they take cultural issues over economic. And today, that's kind of so much of campaign. It's amazing how many people vote for cultural issues. And that could be anything from guns to religion to views towards LGBT community, that kind of thing. And so with that, and they came up with a great slogan. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. 29 years after, and everyone knew the Battle of Tippecanoe. And so, Harrison's a Northern Whig. They hate democracy, but pro-business policy like tariff and the bank, the business elite. Tyler represented Southern Whigs, hate democracy, but they represent the big plantations, the wealthy owners of those slave labor camps. That is the race. Harrison, Tyler. Here's the thing. They only really agree on one thing. They hate the democracy. But they're going to try to sell Harrison as this Westerner. He doesn't support the American system. But he's going to be vice president. Who cares? Vice presidents only do two things. They break the ties of the Senate. Yes.
And they meet where the president's done.
Exactly. But no president's died in office. Nothing to see here. Moving on. This is what we call foreshadowing. So with that, well, soon this will be dubbed a log cabin campaign because a Democratic newspaper, John L. Sullivan, an editor for this pro-Democratic newspaper, mocked Harrison they mocked the image that Harrison was trying to create. That Harrison would only want to sit on the front steps of his log cabin and drink hard cider and could never possibly understand the problems of this country. Now, get past the fact that now the Democrats are using an elitist argument against the Whigs. But here's the biggie. Harrison is trying to proclaim that he is just like everybody with a heart, with a living in a log cabin and sitting on his front steps and drinking hard cider. And now a very widely read Democratic newspaper is saying that. So they said, yes, Harrison does sit on his front porch and does drink hard cider. He's just like you. Thank you for saying that. And soon they built a log cabin in his plantation, kind of away from the main mansion, so Harrison could sit on a rocking chair with a barrel of hard cider like a ladle and act like he's this kind of weird image of what this common man is. And they have the hard cider log cabin Whig almanac. And soon they did all these things about log cabin, and Democrats were shocked. Commoners would never fall for this cheap scam. And then they portrayed Van Buren as an elitist. So here's one of these things, you put a picture in and you flip it back and forth and give like the illusion of his face moving. Almost like a flip book, but it kind of go back and forth like this. I know it seems really like way over our head technologically, but just go with it. So here's Martin Van Buren with a beautiful goblet of White House champagne, the drink of the rich, the elite. That you give him a log cabin hard cider and look at his face. He even had, and this, I'm going to blow your mind. In the White House was this new game that only the elite billiards. You know what billiards is? Yes.
Wait. And it's where you hit a puck with a bat and trying to get it into the opposing team's hands.
No, it could, but no, that's not billiards. It's like a pool table without the holes. So you try to knock the balls in the corner. As we all know, pool is the game of the very elite. Yeah, they mocked him for this. And so, with that, they even had a Whig rolling ball, where they had this big leather ball filled with cotton they rolled from town to town. It started in Indiana, but pretty soon these Whig rolling balls all over. And they drink water. And they go to a town and they have a big parade. And they push the ball through and they have big slogans like, to guide this ship, hold tip, tip, tip. And things like that. And a band will come out. There'll be a parade that have floats. You see that float there pulled by oxen of a log cabin. They carry pictures of log cabins. People started wearing lapel pins of a little log cabin. All of this during these parades, all these people would come out, then they'd have a big barbecue for all the people, and then barrels and barrels and barrels of hard cider. Reminding everybody, where did the hard cider come from? William Henry Harrison and the Whigs. So much hard cider and other alcohol was used by the Whig campaign in Illinois from one distillery that the name of that distillery became synonymous with alcohol. Booze distillery. There was a booze distillery in Illinois. Let me tell you one more thing came out of this. So here's one of us. Van Buren trapped in a log cabin, can't get out because a hard cider was blocking it. Following Andrew Jackson, the Kinderhook Fox is caught. Here's my favorite one, though. Here shows Jackson trying to lead Van Buren the way to the White House. Here's his sub-treasury plan, but can't get past the hard cider and log cabins. And two things. First off, anybody know what he's doing there? Anybody know what that pig-faced boy is doing right there? He's doing this. That was a major insult at the time. Yes.
Like, because he won the battle to win that one before years named.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's one of the more famous generals in American history. Now, Montana, the land was part of, where we're at now was part of the United States. Because of its purchase. So with that, one more thing about it. So Democrats said, no, wait a minute, don't fall for this. He's one of us. He's old Kinderhook. He's okay. That's what okay. Okay, it's positive, came from this campaign. So we have okay booze from 1840. You ever seen okay spelled O-K-A-Y? That came after the fact. And the funny thing about okay is it's like international. Everybody knows okay. So with that, 1840, purple states, they went, this is pre-2000, so no red state, blue state garbage. And so with that, Harrison won a big national victory. Democrats were shocked and had to reevaluate. How are we going to get the common man by our side? Do we do the same tricks as the Whigs, or do we just go out there and campaign and try to convince them we're better? Oh no, they're going to do the same tricks. And you're going to see that's all become a campaign of image. William Henry Harrison is going to be the oldest man ever elected president. People saw him as kind of a dolt, as a puppet. And so he's going to give the longest inaugural address in history to this day to show that he was responsible, he was intelligent, he will give this speech. Almost 2 hours. And it was March 3rd, it's sleeting, it's raining. To prove how young, fit, and vigorous he is, he's going to do it without his beaver felt hat. To show he's cold doesn't affect him. He didn't wear a heavy coat. So what we know is this. After that happened, he caught a cold. The cold did not get better. And then he got sicker and sicker. The thought was he had pneumonia. What did they do for pneumonia in 1841? Here's a blanket. 3 antibiotics. And a month into office, William Henry Harrison became the first president to die. Now, you're going to hear pneumonia. And the cold probably, and he got sick, probably brought it on. But we're almost certain today it wasn't pneumonia. He might have been weakened by the cold and weakened by what happened. But he almost certainly died of another wonderful infectious disease. Almost certain. Cold. And now John Tyler is president. I'm sure nothing big will come out of this. All right, tomorrow. There'll be a quiz tomorrow, up to page 585. Bye.